Amnesia: The Dark Descent is a pretty spooky game.
Spooky, scary skeleton.
Developed by Frictional Games and released in 2010, Amnesia: The Dark Descent is a first-person survival horror game in which you play as Daniel, a man with amnesia, also that's why it's called, as he explores a creepy-ass castle to try to kill a man named Alexander, while also not getting himself killed by whatever the fuck these things are in the process. The game blew up thanks to every Let's Player and their moms making videos of themselves screaming their heads off and losing their goddamn minds over it.
What a fucking—
It was quickly dubbed the scariest game ever made, which happens almost every time a new popular horror game comes out. But for Amnesia, I'm inclined to agree. Amnesia is the scariest game I've played. But why is that? There are plenty of great horror games on the market, but what did this game do so well that no other horror game I've played has managed to dethrone it in more than 10 years after its initial release? Well, there's only one way to find out, and that's through analysis, baby. Let's begin, shall we? Part 1. Music and Sound. What does a panic attack sound like in musical form? If I had to take a guess, I'd say it probably sounds like this. That song is technically from Amnesia Justine, but it's on the Dark Descent soundtrack, so it still counts, and it proves my point. Music and sound are essential components in any game, not just Amnesia, to creating atmosphere and instilling feelings the game wants the player to feel. For example, Doom's soundtrack is all about making you feel like the ultimate demon-slaying badass, through fast-paced and heavy instrumentals featuring a lot of sick-ass guitar riffs. If there's one word to describe the feeling Amnesia's soundtrack instills in me, it would be dread. The feeling that at any moment, a horrible monster might just find me and I'll have to run for dear life. A lot of tracks have this very slow, foreboding pace that makes it seem like danger is around every corner. And when danger actually is around, it ramps up, eventually leading into pure panic, with the Suitor's Chase theme being my favorite example of this. Of course, not every track is scary. There are moments of serenity which are not only appreciated, but needed. If there was nothing to contrast the intense moments and release the tension, one of two things would happen. The horror would either A, become overwhelming, or B, become boring. No matter what, the result is the same. You stop playing. These calmer, more peaceful tracks and the areas that accompany them are what release that tension, so that when it does go back to that pure terror, it's that much more effective because you know what it was like to be safe. But now that safety is gone, and you have no idea of knowing when you'll get it back, at least on your first playthrough. The sound that plays when a monster is nearby is brilliant sound design, because not only does it let you know that you're in serious danger, the sound on its own is terrifying and deeply uncomfortable to listen to. It reminds me of nails on a chalkboard. The sounds the monsters themselves make are just as unsettling, whether it be the roar of a brute or the gargled breathing of a grunt. And as for environmental sound design, the best way I can describe it is that a lot of it reminds me of that feeling you get when you're walking through your house as a little kid and you're the last one awake, constantly analyzing every sound you hear out of the fear that something, anything, might be lurking in the shadows waiting to get you. Part 2. Gameplay, aka sanity, helplessness, and in most horror games, you are given some way to defend yourself. This typically boils down to guns with limited ammunition, think Resident Evil. Some games get a little more creative with it, like the flashlight in Alan Wake, or the plasma cutter in Dead Space. No matter what it is, the same principles usually apply. You have the ability to fight back without just blasting through every enemy you see, which would remove any sense of tension from the game. Amnesia takes a bit of a different approach in that you can't do jack shit. No weapons, no way to fight back. Your only options are running and or hiding. Amnesia wasn't the first game to do this, hell, it wasn't even the first Frictional game to do it, but it was one of the first horror games that made this type of gameplay popular alongside Slender the 8 Pages. Now, there have been debates about which style is better, but for my money, I think the Amnesia style is the scarier of the two. Despite any ammo limitations that games like Resident Evil might throw at me, Having a weapon will always make me feel safer even if enemies are around, because I know if I play it smart, I can use it to get out of any sticky situation I end up in. Whereas in Amnesia, I never feel safe when enemies are around. When I'm playing Amnesia, I'm always aware that I am basically screwed if I fuck up and get cornered due to not having any weapons. The idea of being helpless against something trying to hurt you is one of my greatest fears, and Amnesia taps right into that. It makes me feel like I'm stuck in a nightmare and I can't fucking do anything. In case you somehow haven't noticed it yet, Amnesia is a very dark game. Apparently, whoever owns this castle forgot to pay the electricity bill. And yes, I know this game takes place in a time before electricity, but this is my video, so shut up. Throughout most of the game, your only sources of light are your oil lamp and these candles lying around. And if you run out of lamp oil or matches, too fucking bad. No more light for you. This works so well at creating fear in the player because it exploits one of humanity's oldest phobias. People have been afraid of the dark since we first came into existence. Why is darkness so scary? Because it obscures our vision, our most reliable source of information. Now you have a much harder time telling where something is or what something is. Amnesia takes that idea and says, hey, do you remember all those times when you were a kid and you stayed up at night because that huge pile of clothes in the corner of your room looked just a little bit too much like a scary monster whenever you turned the lights off? Well, guess what? In this game, that monster is real and it's gonna fucking murder you. Aside from limiting your resources, the game has other ways of forcing you into the dark, like making it easier for monsters to spot you when you're in the light. Take the choir hall for instance. This area of the game is brimming with brutes, enemies that can literally one-shot you, so you need to be incredibly careful. That means using your lamp as little as possible to avoid them seeing you, which in turn makes it much harder for you to see them as well. Not only that, but spending time in the dark also means your sanity will decrease. In the game, you have what's called your sanity meter, and being in the dark is just one of many things that will lower it. When it gets low enough, a bunch of crazy shit starts happening. The screen will warp, sounds will come out of nowhere, hallucinations start occurring, and if it reaches 0, you'll collapse on the floor and get up after a few seconds, regaining some sanity. What's great about the sanity meter is how the game uses it to make players scare themselves. The game makes sanity out to be a big deal, telling you that if it gets low enough, enemies will have an easier time finding you, even in the dark. But in reality, nothing like that ever happens. No matter how low your sanity is, the enemy's behavior will never change. The game just straight up lies to you, and it's brilliant because you have no way of knowing that if you went into it blind. So you end up spending the whole game stressing out and worrying over your sanity meter, creating more tension and fear for yourself when there wasn't much to worry about at all. It's honestly genius game design, using the player's own mind against them to make the game even scarier by just planting that idea in their head and letting their imagination do the rest. Part 3.
Damn girl, you got that Lovecraftian
The game takes a lot of inspiration from the works of American horror writer H.P. Lovecraft. Lovecraft, over the course of his career, wrote hundreds of horror stories focusing on his beliefs that humanity was just a small, insignificant part of an infinite cosmos, and the things we don't understand are the things we should be the most afraid of. To quote, "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown." It was a very nihilistic outlook on life. Also, he was a huge racist even for his time, but we won't get into that in this video, so moving on. He was fascinated by the occult, and many of his works revolved around themes of forbidden knowledge, insanity, and cosmic dread, just to name a few. His stories would eventually lead to the creation of the Cthulhu mythos, and played a key role in the birth of the cosmic horror subgenre. Lovecraft's influence can be found all over Amnesia. We've already discussed the game's use of darkness and insanity. Our fear of darkness is an extension of our fear of the unknown, and insanity plagues the protagonist of Amnesia, much like how it plagues the protagonist of many of Lovecraft's stories.
But I'm not done yet!
Throughout the game's story, we are told of an alien land featuring
Spiraling towers, endless deserts, and impossible geometry.
a seemingly unstoppable entity called the Shadow chases you throughout the entire game, covering everything in its path in this red, fleshy substance. The game never explains exactly what this thing is, it's just another unknown. The player is left to fill in the gaps for themselves, and anything their mind comes up with is sure to be scarier than any explanation developers could give. All we know is that it wants Daniel dead for stealing the orb it was protecting, killing anyone and anything that comes into contact with him. Daniel's quest for forbidden knowledge is what got him into this mess in the first place. And let's not forget about the titular Amnesia. Daniel's memory is another unknown, and as you play the game, realizing the horrible things he's done, you'll wish it stayed that way. Remnants of torturous, occult rituals can be found all over the castle. These rituals were used to extract a substance called vitae, I'm not really sure, out of the blood of the victims, which can only be done during times of great stress. Alexander is revealed to be an ancient, otherworldly being, using the vitae in an attempt to return to the world he was banished from, a place no mere mortal could truly understand. This is a story I could easily see being written by Lovecraft during his time. Again, everything ties back to that fear of the unknown I keep mentioning. It's the reason why both Amnesia and the entire cosmic horror subgenre are so terrifying, at least to me. As cliché as it is to say, people fear what they do not understand. And that's because us humans have a nasty, pesky habit of assuming the worst whenever we're left to fill in the blanks. Amnesia uses that against us to create one of the most chilling, horrific, and disturbing experiences in all of video games. Despite the more problematic aspects of Lovecraft stories, seriously, you have no idea just how racist this guy was, holy shit, he is still one of my favorite authors, and I think Amnesia is right up there with Bloodborne for being one of the best representations of Lovecraftian horror in video games. Conclusion. Even with games that have tried to emulate its style, I've never experienced anything quite like Amnesia. With its amazing uses of music and sound, its gameplay's focus on making you feel as vulnerable as possible, and its exploration of Lovecraftian themes, Amnesia has cemented itself as not only one of my favorite games ever made, but also the most horrifying game I've ever played. I had played other horror games before playing Amnesia, but Amnesia was a game that made me fall in love with them. It's such a masterly crafted game that I think everyone interested in horror games should play at least once. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and comment down below, and if you want to see more from me in the future, then please subscribe and hit the notification bell. I'd really appreciate it. Now if you'll excuse me, I have to run away from whatever the hell that thing in the water is!